It says, verse 1, now it came to pass when Isaac was old, and his eyes were so dim that he could not see, that he called Esau his older son and said to him, my son. And he answered and said, here I am. And he said, behold, now I am old, and I do not know the day of my death. Now therefore, please take your weapons, your quiver and your bow, and go out into the field and hunt game for me, and make me savory food, such as I love, and bring it to me, that I may eat, that my soul may bless you before I die. Now Rebekah was listening when Isaac spoke to Esau his son, and Esau went to the field and to hunt game and to bring it. So Rebekah spoke to Jacob her son, saying, indeed, I heard your father speak to Esau your brother, saying, bring me a game and make me savory food for me, that I may eat it and bless you in the presence of the Lord before my death. Now therefore, my son, obey my voice according to what I command you. Go now to the flock and bring me from there 2 choice kids of the goats, and I will make savory food from them for your father, such as he loves. Then you shall take it to your father, that he may eat, that he may bless you before his death. So Jacob said to Rebekah his mother, look, Esau my brother is a hairy man, and I am smooth-skinned man. Perhaps my father will fill me, and I shall seem to be a deceiver to him, and I shall bring a curse on myself and not a blessing. But his mother said to him, let your curse be on me, my son. Only obey my voice and go get them for me. And he went and got them and brought them to his mother, and his mother made savory food such as his father loved. Then Rebekah took the choice clothes of her elder son Esau, which were with her in the house, and put them on Jacob, her younger son, and she put on the skins of the kids of the goats and on his hands and on the smooth part of his neck. And she gave the savory food and prepared bread, which she had prepared, into the hand of her son Jacob. So he went to his father and said, my father. And he said, here I am. Who are you, my son? And Jacob said to his father, I am Esau, your firstborn. I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done just as you told me. Please arise, sit, and eat my game, that your soul may bless me. But Isaac said to his son, how is it that you found it so quickly, my son? And he said, because the Lord your God brought it to me. And Isaac said to Jacob, please come near, that I may feel you, my son, whether you are really my son Esau or not. So Jacob went near to Esau his father, and he felt him, and said, the voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau. And he did not recognize him, because his hands were hairy like his brother Esau's hands, so he blessed him. And he said, are you really my son Esau? He said, I am. And he said, bring it near to me, and I will eat of my son's game, so that my soul may bless you. So he brought it near to him. He ate, and he brought him wine, and he drank. And his father Isaac said to him, come near now, my son, kiss me, my son. And he came near and kissed him, and he smelled the smell of his clothing and blessed him and said, surely the smell of my son is like the smell of the field which the Lord has blessed. Therefore may God give you of the dew of heaven, of the fatness of the earth, and plenty of grain and wine. Let people serve you, and nations bow down to you. Be master over your brethren, and let your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be those who bless you. Now it happened as soon as Isaac had finished blessing Jacob, and Jacob had scarcely gone out from the presence of Isaac his father, that Esau his brother came in from his hunting. He had also made savory food and brought to his father, and said to his father, let my father arise and eat of his son's game, that your soul may bless me. And his father Isaac said to him, who are you? And he said to him, I am your son, your firstborn Esau. Then Isaac trembled exceedingly and said, where is the one who hunted game and brought it to me? I ate all of it before you came, and I have blessed him, and indeed he shall be blessed. When Esau heard the words of his father, he cried with an exceedingly great and bitter cry, and said to his father, bless me also, my father. But he says, your brother came in with deceit and has taken away your blessing. And Esau said, is not he rightly named Jacob, for he has supplanted me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and now look, he has taken away my blessing. And he said, have you not reserved a blessing for me? Then Isaac answered and said to Esau, indeed, I have made him your master, and all his brethren I have given to him as servants. With grain and wine I have sustained him. What shall I do now for you, my son? And Esau said to his father, have you only one blessing, O my father? Bless me also, O my father. And Esau lifted up his voice and wept. Then Isaac his father answered and said to him, behold, your dwelling shall be of the fatness of the earth, and the dew of heaven from above. By your sword you shall live, and you shall serve your brother. And it shall come to pass, when you become restless, that you shall break his yoke from your neck. So Esau hated Jacob, because of the blessing with which his father blessed him. And Esau said in his heart, the days of mourning for my father are at hand, and when and then I will kill my brother Jacob. And the words of Esau, her older son, were told to Rebekah. So she sent and called Jacob, her younger son, and said to him, surely your brother Esau comforts himself concerning you by intending to kill you. Now therefore, my son, obey my voice. Arise, flee to my brother Laban in Haran, and stay with him for a few days until your brother's fury turns away, until your brother's anger turns away from you, and he forgets what you have done to him. Then I will send and bring you from there. Why should I be bereaved also of you both in one day? And Rebekah said to Isaac, I am weary of my life because of the daughters of Heth. If Jacob takes a wife of the daughters of Heth, like those who are these daughters of the land, what good will my life be to me? Let's pray. Lord, thank you for this, Lord, this opportunity to go through the word and study, I would say largely the mistakes of what not to do in the context of this story, Lord, but just the things we can glean from your word as you reveal to us who you are through it. And I just pray for this evening that you just bless the time in your word, and we ask this in your name, amen. You know, I wanted to read the whole chapter, even though it was a little lengthy, because I feel like it almost plays out like a Shakespeare tragedy, you know, where essentially at the end of it, everyone is messed up and mad and angry at everyone else. You guys are familiar with Romeo and Juliet and the star-crossed lovers, and they die at the end. I was looking up, just kind of looking at the synopsis of Hamlet, because I never really looked at, you know, that play or really read it or anything. But in Hamlet, one of the things that happens is it follows the son of the king who discovers that his father was murdered by his uncle. And his uncle assumes the crown and then marries his father's wife, who was also in on it. And so he's kind of unfolding and unraveling this mystery throughout the play, and then he realizes these things, so he goes to murder his uncle, and there's just a whole bunch of things that end up happening, but the uncle also wants to murder him, and so he is going to poison him with a glass of wine, and his mother accidentally drinks it, and so she dies, and then he drinks it, and then he kills his father or his uncle, and then he dies. Everyone's dead at the end of the play is what it comes down to. Like, now, this isn't quite as tragic, but no one's dead. But when you get to the end of the story, everyone in this story is like in this place of just destruction. Everyone's suffering at the hands of other people, seeking to accomplish, you know, their own will, or sometimes they're trying to accomplish the will of God, but in their own strength. And that's really the lessons we'll see. And really, in the end, we'll see no one gets what they actually want, which probably is the overarching moral of the story in the first place. Sin stinks. It messes things up. Proverbs 13:15 says, good understanding gains favor, but the way of the unfaithful is hard. And anytime you try to go against God's plan for your life, it's going to be hard, no matter how tempting it might be to do that thing that seems easy. Going against the work of God in your life, the will of God, is going to make things hard. It's going to be difficult, for the ways of the unfaithful is hard. If you've been here following with us verse by verse through this book, you know, we're focusing on the life of Abraham and the blessing that's being inherited now by his descendants, especially this blessing that we know of as faith, right? As we follow God through a relationship of faith, that we understand our place in the kingdom of heaven because God has reached down to us by grace through faith. And so that blessing of faith applies to all of us. And in our current backdrop, Abraham and Sarah, his wife, have both passed away. Their son of promise, Isaac, has two sons, Jacob and Esau, as we read a couple weeks ago. And these sons, from the get-go, even in the womb, were at each other's throat, trying to murder one another. And we know that Isaac was the one who Jacob came out after Esau, but he was clutching his brother's heels, so they named him Thief. And Esau came out covered in hair and looking red, and so they named him Hairy. And, Esau, we read in the end of chapter 25, was out hunting game, was starving, and came home, and Jacob had, essentially cooked up a pot of stew for his brother with the intent of robbing his brother of the firstborn right, and robbed him of that spiritual responsibility of being the oldest son. That birthright is what it's called. And he traded his God-given birthright for a bowl of beans and a dry, crusty crouton. And, the point being, long before we get to chapter 27, you see some of the characteristics of these guys already brewing. Jacob is a thief. Esau is self-indulgent. He's, reactionary. Even now we're seeing it applies to the parents. The way that they were favoring their sons is going to come back to bite them so vividly in this story. And if you just read with me the first few verses again, it says, now it came to pass when Isaac was old, his eyes were so dim that he could not see, that he called Esau his older son and said to him, my son. And he answered him, here I am. Then he said, behold, now I am old. I do not know the day of my death. Now, therefore, please take your weapons, your quiver, your bow, and go out to the field and hunt game for me, and make me savory food such as I love, and bring it to me that I may eat, that my soul may bless you before I die. Now, Isaac thinks he's about to die. I don't know what makes him think that. He's lost his sight, and so that's probably some of it, is he can't see. And so kind of as a last will and testament, he wants to bless his older son. Now, interestingly enough, we know from the text that Jacob lives at least, or sorry, not Jacob, Isaac lives at least another 20 years after this. So he's not even close to being done. We know because Jacob will go away for 20 years and then come back and his dad's still alive. Now, Isaac, coupled this blessing. He's going to bless his son, but he wants something in return. And his favorite thing on the planet is meat. It's his son's game. When his son would go out and cook him delicious food, he's like, if I'm going to bless my son, I should get something from this. So he sends his son out, and he's kind of the mentality, this might be my last meal. I want it to be good. I want it to be really good. I don't want to waste any junk meals on my life. And you would suspect that this should be a family affair. That generally in this culture, if someone was passing a blessing like this down to their son, they would gather the whole family and say, hey, let's celebrate, let's have this blessing. But you can see there's some shade here as Isaac is kind of keeping this secret between himself and his son. And part of that is because we know this family dynamic. When they were in the womb, Rebekah was given a prophecy that the younger was going to have the older be servant to him. And so essentially since that point, Jacob and Esau were fighting, and Isaac and Rebekah were scheming to make that not happen, or at least Isaac was scheming to make that not happen, and Rebekah was scheming to make it happen. And so this family dynamic is entirely deceptive, not just what we see with Rebekah and Jacob in this story, but also Isaac, who favors his eldest son against the will of God and looks to accomplish his will over God's will in this story. It goes on, and as the narrative lays out, if you're paying attention, it's pretty funny, but it says that Rebekah was listening when Isaac spoke to Esau and his son. And Esau went to the field to hunt game and bring it. So Rebekah spoke to Jacob, her son, saying, indeed, I heard your father speak to Esau, your brother, saying, bring me game and make savory food for me, that I may eat it and bless you in the presence of the Lord before my death. Now, therefore, my son, obey my voice according to what I command you. Go now to the flock and bring me from there 2 choice kid of the goats, and I will make savory food from them of your father, such as he loves. Then you shall take it to your father, that he may eat it, and that he may bless you before his death. And Rebekah, she looks like she, again, scheming and is kind of putting it lightly, but she's listening in, eavesdropping on this conversation between her husband and her son. And so immediately she starts scheming. How do I stop this blessing from happening? Or better yet, how do I transfer this blessing from Esau to my beloved son, Jacob, my favorite? And parents, let this be a warning to you if you have children at home still. Never tell your kids who's your favorite, okay? Keep that to yourself. That secret should die with you. Her plan is simple. She's going to cook a meal. And that meal is going to be disguised as venison. It's not going to actually be from the field. It's going to be goats. But it's going to taste similar. She's going to make it, again, disguised as and hope that he never finds out. And then she's going to dress her son up and disguise him in the way that he smells, and the way that, again, here's a smooth-skinned, soft son. He's going to disguise as this hairy, stinky Sasquatch of a man, we know as Esau. It wasn't going to be easy, but she's like, it's worth trying if it means we get the blessing. And so she starts scheming, so she's going to dress up her son almost like he's a doll. And that's what happens in verse 11. It says, and Jacob said to Rebekah, his mother, Look, Esau, my brother, is a hairy man, and I'm a smooth-skinned man. Perhaps my father will fill me, and I shall seem to be a deceiver to him. And I shall bring a curse on myself and not a blessing. But his mother said to him, let your curse be on me, my son. Only obey my voice and go, get them for me. And he went and got them and brought them to his mother, and his mother made savory food such as his father loved. Then Rebekah took the choice clothes of her eldest sons, Esau, which were in her house, and put them on Jacob, her younger son. And she put the skins of the kids of the goats on his hands and on the smooth part of his neck. Then she gave the savory food and the bread which she had prepared into the hand of her son Jacob. And again, when you vividly, if you picture this in your mind, it's kind of funny, at least it is to me, but, I just imagine Jacob, getting Esau's dirty laundry and putting it on, and then covering himself with these goat skins with this, arms full of food going into dad. And the reality is he didn't look like or sound anything like Esau. He didn't look like his brother or sound like him. But that wasn't the point, right? He was supposed to smell like him and feel like him. And he did accomplish that. And again, luckily, he's essentially blind, so he has no sense of being able to see that. And his sense of smell or his sense of hearing is probably pretty dull at this time. He does mention at one point, wait, you sound like Jacob, but you smell an awful lot like Esau. Like, which sense do you trust the most is, I guess, when it comes down to. Now, notice when his mother comes to Jacob, Jacob doesn't refute her. He doesn't do what he should have done and told his mom no. He argues and reasons with her, not that we shouldn't do this at all, but I think we're going to get caught. If I try to go and disguise myself as my brother, I think my dad's going to figure it out because I don't look anything like him. I don't smell like him. I don't talk like him. And so he's worried he might get caught and in fact, that his dad might in turn curse him rather than bless him. And so that's what he's afraid of. To which mom replies, nah, you're good, son. Curse be on me. Don't worry about this. And I know there's no kids in here, but kids, don't ever lie for your parents right there. That's actually what they're learning tonight in Sunday school. I don't know what the lesson is, but... you're like, wow, I can't imagine why Jacob found it so easy to lie. In this story, his mom is like just so deceptive. It's unfortunate. Like that's kind of her character that is exemplified in the scripture. Proverbs 19:5 says, a false witness will not go unpunished, and he who speaks lies will not escape. And that's the reality of those who tell lies. It's going to come out. And obviously her story, Isaac's story, Jacob's story, Esau's story is told here in tragedy, in fashion here in chapter 27. In verse 18, we get the interaction between father and son as he went to his father and said, my father, his best Esau impersonation. And he said, here I am, who are you, my son? And Jacob said to his father, I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done just as you told me. Please arise, sit and eat of my game, that your soul may bless me. But Isaac said to his son, how is it that you have found it so quickly, my son? And he said, because the Lord your God brought it to me. He's making lies up right on the spot, right? And Isaac said, please come near that I may feel you, my son, whether you are really my son Esau or not. So Jacob went near to Isaac, his father, and he felt him and said, the voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau. And he did not recognize him because his hands were hairy, like his brother Esau's hands. So hairy, so hairy. You're covering it with goat hair. That's insane. So he blessed him, and he said, are you really my son Esau? He said, I am. So he said, bring it near to me, and I will eat my son's game, so that my soul may bless you. And he brought it near to him, and he ate, and he brought him wine, and he drank. And then his father Isaac said to him, come here now and kiss me, my son. And he came near and kissed him and smelled the smell of his clothing and blessed him and said, surely the smell of my son is like the smell of a field which the Lord has blessed. And, this section is just wrought with lies. You can see it from the get-go in verse 19. Who's there? It's me, your son Esau. And then in verse 20, he asks him, how'd you get the food so fast? He's like, the Lord, well, it's just like the Lord brought it to me. Obviously, he's blessing me. And Then in the third lie, he has directly asked him, are you really my son? In verse 24, he's like, yeah, that's me. Just straight lies to his dad. Not to mention the overt deception of disguising both the food and himself, right? Coming in, trying to make sure this food, of course, looks like the food that his brother would bring in from the outside. And then, disguised with the hair that his brother would have on his body. And of course, Dad's suspicious for a couple of reasons. He thinks the food got here way too quick. And then again, the voice sounds an awful lot like his brother Jacob. And something's off, but he doesn't investigate further apart from just smelling him, right? And feeling him. He's like, well, that's enough. If I smell him and I feels like Esau, it must be Esau. I have a joke. I heard about two men who are working in a very tight place, and one of them finally said to the other, wow, I think the deodorant of one of us has quit working. And the other fellow answered, it must be yours because I don't use any. Here you go. That's the smell joke there. When Isaac smelt his son, he's like, he even blesses the smell. And you guys, I'll promise you, it was not a pleasant smell. This is the guy who's out in the field. And Isaac just loves that manly smell of a dirty sock drawer, He came near and kissed him and smelled the smell of his clothing and blessed him. Surely the smell of my son is the smell of a field. And we're probably talking like a field where animals go to the bathroom. That's the kind of field he smelled like. And that's the smell that really convinced him that this was his son Esau. Now, Jacob could justify this deception because he knew that God wanted to bless him. And we know Rebekah knew this prophecy from chapter 25. She knew that God had told her that her younger would be served by her older son. And I promise you, we don't know this from the text, but I'm sure dead set that she told her son this, which was a mistake. And so in his mind, he is the chosen son, and he could justify any lie or deception in pursuit of what he felt like was his God-given right. You follow? Like sinning all the way along, telling himself, well, it's for a right cause. It's for a just cause. And how many people in similar situations have justified their sin because they saw this thing in the end that they thought was good. And so they go all about it and all these lying and greed or whatever it is, whatever sin is involved, gossip, slander, thinking that I'm going to get through these things so that I could accomplish God's will. And kind of the premise, and I would say the moral is there's no sin that you can justify before God. All sin's an affront to him. It's an affront to his purpose. That's never God's plan for our lives. It goes against his good and perfect nature. In fact, in Titus 1, it says that this truth gives them confidence that they have eternal life, which God, who does not lie, New King James says he cannot lie, promised them before the world began. You see, it's against his very nature to be deceptive. And so if we're going about trying to accomplish God's will by lying, we're going against who God is. And that's ultimately the issue that God has with all sin. And it's an affront to who he is. And he is good. He is true. He is holy. He is perfect and righteous and just. And our sin is none of that. It falls so short of God's glory. And so, again, all this just becomes this messed up, tangled story. He does end up blessing his son, right? He blesses him in verse 28. Therefore, may God give you of the dew of heaven, of the fatness of the earth, and plenty of grain and wine. Let peoples serve you and nations bow down to you. Be master over your brethren, and let your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be those who bless you. Now, some of this blessing sounds very, very familiar to the blessing given to Abraham, his grandfather. The birthright part that we spoke to in chapter 25 was kind of the material blessing of the family, right? It involved a double portion. So it was an inheritance thing that when you died, you got twice as much as your brother. And it was given usually to the oldest. But Jacob convinced his brother Esau to sell it to him. The blessing of the firstborn, again, was to establish them as well as the headship of the family, the spiritual blessing of the family. And that would be something that was passed down among the family as an inheritance. So it went from Abraham to his son Isaac. And then in Isaac's mind, it should have gone to Esau, but instead it goes to Jacob. And this blessing speaks as of the provision of God. Obviously, God's going to provide for his family, and that's part of the blessing. It's material, but it's also spiritual, right? That God is going to essentially be the one who blesses them, and those who bless them will also be blessed, and those who curse them will be cursed. The blessing speaks of God's provision, the plenty of grain, which would be kind of a necessity, things that God gives us that we need. But then also he speaks of wine, which would be more of a luxury, how God gives us things that we don't even need. He blesses us on top of the basics of what we need. And so you go through this blessing, and it's a really neat blessing to have from a father to a son. That there's going to be peoples, nations that bow down to you, that serve you. That's obviously been the history of Israel to some degree, not always, but they have been at times in a position where others have bowed to them, and they have ruled over others. And so he's speaking this blessing to, again, this is the important blessing that would be passed down through the ages to the sons, to the patriarchs of the family. And so Esau comes in, verse 30, and it happened as soon as Isaac had finished blessing Jacob, and Jacob had scarcely gone out of the presence of Isaac his father, that Esau, his brother, came in from hunting. So it's like they're just missing each other, right? Esau didn't come in while this was going on. His brother's leaving. He's probably walking out of his father's tent and pulling the skins off his back. Hey, what's up? How you doing? Just going this way. And Esau's like, what's going on? So he walks in, and he made, verse 31, a savory food and brought it to his father and said to his father, let my father arise and eat of his son's gain, that your soul may bless me. And his father, Isaac, said to him, who are you? So he said, I am your son, your firstborn, Esau. And Isaac trembled exceedingly and said, who? Where's the one who hunted game and brought it to me? I ate all of it before you came, and I have blessed him, and indeed he shall be blessed. And when Esau heard the words of his father, he cried with an exceedingly great bitter cry and said to his father, bless me also, O my father. But he says, your brother came with deceit and has taken away your blessing. Now imagine Esau, how he felt coming in, probably thinking, he's on top of the world, like he caught fresh game. He's not coming in like he did last time, not having caught anything. He got, food for his dad. It's all prepped. Dad's going to bless me. This is the best day ever. And then he walks in and, boom, his whole world is just destroyed. And his hopes and dreams are dashed in a moment. In fact, the term that's used to describe Isaac's response, because he's also broken in this, he's been deceived. It mentions that he trembles exceedingly. That's literally the idea of like he's convulsing. It's like vehement trembling. Like he is so devastated by this deception. And, interestingly enough, Isaac recognizes the power of his blessing, his promise. I mean, at this point, if you recognize that, this is just a blessing that I'm giving, why don't I just take back the one I gave to Jacob and now give it to Esau? I'll be like, psych, it's not for you. I'm going to give it to your brother instead. But he can't. He recognizes that his words are established, that when you say something, it's in this context, a spiritual context, it's to be true. It's to be final. And it's the kind of the image and picture of what God does and how he speaks, how his words are truth. In Psalm 78:5, it says, for he established a testimony in Jacob and appointed a law in Israel, which he commanded our fathers that they should make known to their children. And so there's an establishing going on that when, Isaac blesses his son, whoever it is, he can't take it back. He can't renege and go, I'm going to give it to the other son. I'll change course. Like it's done. Or to put it in modern vernacular, no takesies, backsies. I can't undo what I've done here. And so he does give his son Esau a blessing, but it's much lesser. If you look at it, it says, verse 36, Esau's response, he says, is he not rightly named Jacob? Which means thief, right? Which means supplanter. For he has supplanted me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and now look, he has taken my blessing. And he said, have you not reserved a blessing for me? And Isaac answered and said to Esau, indeed, I have made him your master. And all your brethren I have given him as servants with grain and wine. I have sustained him. What shall I do for you now, my son? And Esau said to his father, have you only one blessing, my father? Bless me also, O my father. And Esau lifted up his voice and wept. When Isaac his father answered and said to him, behold, your dwelling shall be of the fatness of the earth and of the dew of the heaven above. By your sword you shall live, and you shall serve your brother. And it shall come to pass, when you become restless, you shall break his yoke from your neck. Now this recognition starts off in verse 36 with Esau realizing essentially that he's been ripped off twice now. Because even though he was the one who sold his birthright, he was complicit in that. It's not like he wasn't willing to give it up. He recognizes also that his brother bamboozled him. Right? He came in starving, thinking he was going to die. And so his brother took advantage of Esau's famished state. He wasn't thinking straight. And his brother should have been gracious to him, but he wasn't. And the moral of that is never go to the grocery store on an empty stomach. Right? You make really bad decisions. You're like walking out with Pop-Tarts and Cheez-Its, like, what am I doing? And his brother did that. He sold this precious thing that God had given him. And so he calls what his brother a thief, a supplanter. He has stolen what is mine. And Esau begs his father for a blessing that he can't give. It's gone, and he's left with this much lesser blessing. In fact, commentators indicate what Isaac bestowed on Esau when it says your dwelling shall be from the fatness of the earth. The idea there is that he's going to live as a nomad, that he's going to live off the land. Like he's not going to have a home. He's not going to have a place of rest like the blessing that God would have on his brother. And he would also, he says he's going to live by the sword. He's going to be at odds with everyone around him. He's going to fight with everyone around him. And that he would be a servant to his brother, but not forever. And if you're Esau at this point, you might have been like, never mind, Dad, I don't want you to bless me. It's like, that didn't help. Keep your blessing to yourself next time. And interestingly enough, that last part of the blessing, that you shall break the yoke from his yoke from your neck, it's prophetic. And I didn't know this until I was, just reading and researching on this. But the Edomites, which are the descendants of Esau, they got their name from the name of the stew, right, which was red. And that word means it's Edom in Hebrew, and that's where they got that name. But the Edomites eventually were pushed out of where they lived, which was more on the east side of the Jordan, and they got pushed closer to what would be called the West Bank of Jerusalem. And they were pushed in that area, and they became known as the Idumeans. And the Idumeans, you maybe are familiar with them from history, but there was a governor of Idumea who was a guy named Antipater, and Antipater was the father of Herod the Great. And so when you get to the New Testament, Herod the Great is the one who tries to kill Jesus because he's the baby king. He's the one who had rebuilt or restored the second temple, and he has all these great monuments to himself there. And, he was partly Jewish, and his Jewish heritage had to not do as much with his Jewish actual background, but the fact that he came from Esau's line. And so you now have kind of this prophecy fulfilled where instead of the Israelites ruling over the Idumeans or the Edomites, you have them ruling over Jacob to a degree. And so it's this interesting history that comes about from this small little prophecy given of his brother that doesn't really apply to his life. He's not going to be in a position where this ever really applies to him, but again, speaks to broadly his family, his descendants. The story ends with, this tragedy. Esau, verse 41, hated his brother Jacob because of the blessing with which his father blessed him. Esau said in his heart, the days of mourning for my father are at hand, then I will kill my brother Jacob. And the words of Esau, her older son, were told to Rebekah. So she sent and called Jacob, her younger son, and said to him, surely your brother Esau comforts himself concerning you by intending to kill you. Now therefore, my son, obey my voice. Arise, flee to my brother Laban in Haran, and stay with him for a few days until your brother's fury turns away, until your brother's anger turns away from you, and he forgets what you have done to him. Then I will send and bring you from there. Why should I be bereaved also of you both in one day? And verse 46 actually goes better with chapter 28, so we'll just pause right there. But what you have kind of as the story unfolds, and again, just this tragedy, is Esau concocts a plan to kill his brother. But he is gracious enough at least to wait till his father dies, so his father doesn't have to mourn And then, he didn't know at the time that it would be a long time before his dad died, but everyone thought he was on his deathbed. And then somehow the words, notice it says that he said this in his heart. He's like, it's verse 41. Esau said in his heart, I'm going to kill my brother. But something about that made his mom in tune with what was happening. And she understood exactly what was in his heart. And so she calls Jacob and is like, hey, your brother wants to kill you. And he's serious. And so you need to flee to Laban, my brother, where you'll be safe for a while till your brother, he'll get over it. Just give him some time. And that's essentially what happens. It's not too dissimilar, by the way. At the end of the chapter, Rebekah starts asking, she's going to Isaac and talking to him about sending their son away to find a wife, which is how Isaac found his wife. They sent a servant away to get Rebekah, but he's going to go back to the family. Now, what's unfortunate, again, this is tragic. What's unfortunate is Rebekah's doing this under the guise and premise of saving her son. She's like, I'll save Jacob from her brother. So she sends him away, and she never sees him again. Like, that's the last encounter she ever has with her son. And I doubt that was her plan, but in her urgency to protect him, she ends up losing him. I mean, if she had just believed God's prophecy over her son, she wouldn't have lost this relationship. Instead, she had to make it happen. And there's so many lessons here. I just have 3 things I wrote down for us tonight to kind of take with us. This one is for our older people. Number 1 is this: you're not done yet, okay? I told you Isaac would live for another 20 years. That's the minimum. Martin Luther did the math, and he reckoned 43 more years at this point. So here he is on his deathbed, essentially, with another entire lifetime of myself. I'm 42 years old. He can live 43 more years, and he's like, I'm dead. I'm done. I'm just going to sit in my bed and retire. I know some of you guys are retired. I know I'm not going to call you out tonight, but I know some of you guys are retired. But I will say this: as believers, you never get to really retire, do you? If you're a follower of Christ, you might be done working in like a secular capacity, but you've got a ton of time left to devote to work of the kingdom. And I want to kind of just encourage you to not fall privy to that mindset, to pray to that mindset that Isaac have of just kind of defeatism. Well, I'm old, I'm about to die, I might as well just stay in my tent and enjoy one last meal, that you're no longer useful for God. And that's to me nonsense. One of the things that we fail to recognize, the youth fail to recognize, is the wisdom and experience of someone who's gone before them. I feel like, in fact, people who are retired from their secular work are much in the same capacity to do the work of the kingdom as young adults. And we have both of those here tonight. But young adults are in that phase of life where they're not married, they don't have kids. They're limited in their income and resources, but they have lots of strength and energy and vigor. They go out doing great things, right? Well, when you're retired and your kids are out of the house, you're also untethered to a degree. You don't have a job to go to, except for you have money. You have things experience. You have things that you can do to go and be, I would say, very helpful in the work that God is doing. And so there are other attributes that maybe you don't have the strength and vigor. Maybe you can't see or hear as well as you once did. But you have things that are very valuable to the work that God is doing. I don't know if you guys are familiar with George Mueller. He was a man who started a ton of orphanages in England. That was kind of his main ministry. Saw this great need in his community and started just praying that God would radically provide. I mean, in the end of his life, which he didn't have any wealth really when he died, but he had collected would be equivalent of hundreds of millions of dollars today to build these orphanages that God provided just from people just reaching out and saying, hey, I heard you're doing this. I want to give you money for this. He had a different kids under his care, over 18,000 kids. They were educated and cared for and fed in his orphanages. That's kind of his legacy is the orphan ministry. But there's another, I would say, second act to George Mueller, that in his later years, after his first wife had passed, he got remarried to a woman who was about 16 years younger than him. but she was kind of like the one that kind of like would set up these missionary meetings. And he began to travel. When he was 70 years old, he traveled for 17 years over 40 different countries preaching the gospel. I mean, completely transitioned his ministry and focus that late in life and reached over 3 million people while still overseeing his orphanages. But he gave away more than 250,000 Bibles. And I just look at an example of someone like that. And again, I don't see this mentality with our fellowship, but there are some people who are like, I'm retired. It's just time to die. It's like, that's not the case. I always love the story of Caleb, and we're going to get to in the book of Joshua, but they go into the promised land. Caleb is 80 years old and he's slaying giants. Okay. And so he's got time left. And I just want to encourage the church, the body, especially our older believers, with that encouragement that don't be like Isaac. Kind of see in the second thing I want to point out in this text is the difference between being self-willed versus God-willed. And that's the tragedy of the story, is that it ends with family discord, hatred, even murderous threats. And consider every character in the story was sinful to a degree, had disobeyed God at some point. Isaac put his own desires above the Lord's. Again, not wanting to make this a family affair, kind of deceptive. I'm going to bless my son, but I also want something from it. I want to get a last meal. And really, he should have known that blessing his oldest son was against the will of God. God had given him a prophecy already about this. And even in that, you see, he has a suspicion that this is not his son, but maybe he knows that it's Jacob. Maybe he knows it's not Esau, but he trusts his senses, right? He trusts his sense of smell and touch and taste and feel, because he lived by his feelings to a degree. And that, again, is not a way you want to live. You look at Rebekah, here she is spying on her husband, eavesdropping in on her tent. And you wonder what kind of relationship they have at this point in their lives. And they're much older, obviously, but they've allowed these kind of compromises in their relationship where they've lost trust with each other. Why couldn't there be an open conversation? Why couldn't they just come together and say, hey, this is not where the blessing should be. It should be on Jacob, but she can't, right? So she begins to scheme, takes matters into her own hands to rectify this injustice in her mind. Even making vows that, I promise you, Isaac won't be cursed, it will be me, because my husband will be ticked at me, not you. And she maybe not wrong on that to that degree, but you can kind of just see the dynamic there of the relationship, which is unfortunate. Of course, you have Jacob, who lies about his name, lies about his meat, lies about his identity. Probably the meat is the worst part, but don't lie about meat. But he lies about all these things. And then Esau, who is the one taken advantage of, and he's kind of the innocent party, but he's not really, right? He's the one who disqualified himself for the blessing by selling it to his younger brother. Also, we learned actually right before this, the context of chapter 27, the very last verses of chapter 26. I don't know if you guys remember. It was kind of just real briefly spoken last week, but in verse 34, when Esau was 40 years old, he took wives, Judith, the daughter of Beri the Hittite, and Basemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, and they were a grief of mind to Isaac and Rebekah. And so the very context to this whole thing is Esau marrying ungodly women, marrying someone who's going to make him unequally yoked, and really that should disqualify him for the blessing as well. He hates his brother, which the Bible's already spoke to this in Genesis chapter 4 between Cain and Abel, that the older brother should be the keeper. He should be the one who looks out for the younger. He should be looking out for his brother, but he doesn't care. He vows to avenge himself by murdering his brother instead. And again, I actually titled this study Jewish Tragedy, because that's what it is. They have a Greek tragedy. It's the Jewish tragedy. None of them trusted each other, but worse than that, none of them trusted the Lord. Right? Everyone schemed and plotted against each other and against God's will. Spurgeon said this about this chapter. He said, the whole story reflects no credit upon any of the persons concerned. There's not one person in this story you're like, well, they did that right. There's not one point in the story where we're like, well, at least they did this. There's at least some integrity here. None of it is worth looking at and wanting to grab onto. And I think the worst aspect of this all is they seem to regard this blessing as like it's a magical spell or something. that if I can just get dad to say the words over me, then they can't go back on these things. And they detach this blessing from the will of God, from God's wisdom. And in giving this blessing, all Isaac could really do is acknowledge God's plan. God's plan was to bless Jacob all along, and it didn't matter how many blessings Esau would have received from his father, because he could have given him 1,000 blessings. If it wasn't the will of God, it wouldn't work, right? Only God is the one who could really bless or curse someone. And so ultimately, the only thing that mattered was the will of God. And that's kind of the lesson, right? We can never accomplish the will of God in our own strength or in our flesh. That is of our own inclination, our natural strength or ability, our own justification. If we try to do what God wants us to do apart from the Spirit of God, we're always going to fail. And we're always going to be in a position where we're willing to abandon the question of right or wrong, willing to abandon integrity and truth in pursuit of what we think we deserve. The word that comes to mind is the word pragmatic. The word pragmatic is the idea that, I'm just using conventional wisdom. It's what makes logical sense here. And doing things by your flesh or your logic is, especially in the context of God's will, is justifying your behavior when it's in complete opposition for what God would have you be, is exactly the opposite of what God looks for. And again, the sad part is every character in this tragedy suffered because they refused God's will. And they would have been better to learn simply that God's way is better, right? Last thing is the spiritual versus the material blessing. Esau focused on the latter. He wanted the material blessing. He felt robbed of those material blessings that he felt was owed to him. I'm the firstborn. That should be my blessing. And I doubt he had in his mind any notion of a spiritual blessing being passed down to him. And so his pursuit was corrupt from the get-go. And his attitude, you noticed it in the text, he says, my brother has robbed me these 2 times. He supplanted me. He's stolen from me. And that's true of any material blessing, right? It can be stolen. If you have material goods, those material goods can be gone. But what's so great about a spiritual blessing is it's the most secure investment ever. Like, you can't lose it, right? I was sharing with our board last night. We had an elders meeting. Like, I'm just not a good investor. And I think the Lord has kept me humble with that. A few years back, I had a good idea to buy a car at an auction, and it was an online auction, and they're like, it's this Kia. They would start it up. I'm like, this car runs. It was $400. I was like, this is nothing. This makes so much sense. Even if I just bought it and flipped around and sold it, I could probably make $600. And I got this thing, and it was a lemon, you guys. It was the most junky piece of garbage I've ever seen in my life. I paid $400. I paid $200 to get a title for it, and then I sold it for $200. And I was like, well, at least I made some money back. Last year, during the playoffs, my friend was buying Mariners playoff tickets. And he's buying tickets, and he's like, dude, and he was telling me he bought like really nice tickets, but he's like, I just sold them, and I was able to buy more tickets, and I still made like $2,000. I was like, what? He's like, yeah, they just opened up the playoff tickets, and so I went and bought some playoff tickets, and then I couldn't sell them. And so instead, I just went to the most expensive playoff game I've ever gone to in my entire life with my son and Wes. I was like, I can't sell them. I guess I might as well go. I was like, that did not make me any money. It lost me a ton. And the sad part, here's the worst part, is if the Mariners would have made the World Series, they're 1 game away, I bought World Series tickets, and I actually did sell those. And I would have made all the things I lost back. But they lost, and they didn't make it, and I'm a tragic fan. You can lose so much here, you guys, right? You can lose your inheritance. You can even lose people. You can lose stuff. But you can't lose blessings that are eternal. And that's the focus that these guys should have had, that Jacob should have had, Esau should have had. Jesus, I'll leave you guys with this verse. Jesus said in Matthew 6, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where there neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. If you only covet material blessings from God, you'll probably find a way to get them. You'll probably find a way to get them. But if you only desire spiritual blessings, Matthew 6:33, right after that, he says he'll add all these things to you. Like, he'll give you things you don't deserve, but our hearts, our focus should be on the spiritual. That's where we should be focusing. So I'll leave us with that. Let's pray. Lord, thank you so much for your word. That I would say learning from the bad is a good way to learn as well, from the bad example of this entire family drama, but really just to focus again on the things that are eternal, not the things that are they're short and temporary, Lord. Help us to be focused on your kingdom and the purpose and plan you have for us. Lord, thank you for generation that's gone before us that loves you, God, that represents this church, that speaks your word, that shares with their friends and neighbors, that shares the gospel. God, just pray you continue to stir in our older generation, Lord, just the desire to finish well, to finish strong. For our younger generation, Lord, to not make the same mistakes as those who've gone before them, to not make the mistakes of Esau and Jacob and Isaac and Rebekah from this story, Lord, but to do things according to your spirit and by your might, not by your strength, but not our own, Lord. We just pray you'd walk with us, continue to speak to us, bless us, Lord, as we go our way, and we ask this in your name. Amen. God bless you guys.